Hey, everybody, this is Tom Sega from Duluth Pack, and this is the Duluth Pack podcast, Leader of the Pack. Our special guest today is somebody I've known for a long time. He's a leader in his industry. Today's guest is Dan Dougherty, co-owner and funeral director at Dougherty Funeral Home in Duluth, Minnesota. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Tom. I appreciate the invitation.
This will be the first podcast we've done of anyone in your industry. And folks, you need to listen to all the background that goes into what Dan does for a career and how he got into the industry and really what goes on in Dan's day to day. So stay tuned here and we're going to get started with Dan. So Dan, at first, let's just go back to your youth. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? And then we'll roll forward into your career.
I was lucky. I was raised on a farm out in Hermantown with my siblings and my mom and dad. I'm number 9 of 12 kids. I have 10 sisters and 1 brother. And growing up on the farm was as good as you could get. I went to Hermantown all the way through high school. Played hockey for a couple of years. Played on the tennis team. I really, growing up on a farm, we do fencing, haying, all those other fun stuffs, and that really does make it so you can just about do anything. If you grow up on a farm, you can do a lot. You can do a lot of things. I'm incredibly dyslexic, and so I hated school from kindergarten on because I couldn't read. And but I made it through school. I went to UMD. I went to University of Minnesota Mortuary School. Received. I do not have a degree in mortuary science. I'm 1/4 short, or a lot of people say I'm 1 quart short at least.
Well, you played goalie, so maybe it was just taking the puck after being a couple too many times.
Well, Tom, my dad always said to be a good funeral director, you had to have a strong back and a weak mind. And so I tell people I'm not the smartest guy on the earth. I said I played rugby in college. I played goalie up till I was 62, and I'm a funeral director. I am not a bright person. So,
we'll argue that point because I've been around you.
Yeah. Let me see. Growing up, I loved it on the farm, and I ended up actually living on the farm for 50 years until actually the state of Minnesota bought it from me, and it's going to be the new MnDOT facility up there. So I started with Dad when I was old enough to drive, and he had a funeral director. I think I was 16, that had bought his own funeral home. And so he needed a driver during the summer. And he said, "Do you want to do it?" And I said, "Well, sure, I'll give it a try." And I found out that I really liked it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the people. I enjoyed the people that I worked with at the funeral home. And I figured I could do it. And this is being a funeral director, you have to like what you do. Otherwise, you're hurting people. And I do really like what I do. And my dad was a great, a great coach, to learn things and patience. Although one time after I started buying him out, he was giving me some grief. And I said to him, I stopped him. I said, I used to think you were a pretty good businessman until you left yours and Mom's future up to me. And I said, then I lost all respect for you.
Well, you're cutting yourself a little short.
No.
Dan,
yes.
Let's go back to schooling. So
yes.
you went to university up here, and then you went on to mortuary school. What type of curriculum first did you have when you went to university? It's a family business, but to say, hey, I think I might want to go into the family business. And then when you decided, what's a curriculum like in mortuary sciences?
Well, I knew that I was going to be a funeral director, so I took the prerequisites with had a little bit more sciences than normal, but they still want you, any college degree you get, they want you to be kind of well-rounded, know a little bit about everything, the arts and things like that. So, you take those type of classes, but a little bit more sciences. And then mortuary school, so you need 2 years of liberal arts or, to get into the school. And then 2 years of mortuary school, which is the last, when I was there, the last quarter that you were in there, you did a practicum at another person's funeral home. So you just work there for free. And you kind of see how other people do it too. Honestly, you learn more in 6 months where you're going to work than they could really teach you in mortuary school, because they taught you how to embalm, but they didn't teach you when to stop. And because the bodies that we embalmed in mortuary school were people that went on to the bequest program with the U. And so they embalmed them differently after what we were doing. So that made things a little bit more difficult. Also, there's a bunch of students, so you really only can do too much, so much at a time. So, but truly, I was lucky here with Jerry Andrews, when I came back here, he was a wonderful embalmer, and that's very important to be able to be a good embalming. If we do our job right, the deceased should look a lot better than they did when they died. And so instead of, and it really came out in my mom's, when she died, my mom would have hated it the way she looked, because she was in a coma and her hair wasn't done, her eyes were open and glazed over, and she would have just hated the way she looked. And to see her, at the visitation, dressed, her makeup on and her jewelry on, that was my mom. And so instead of instead of the view of her when she was dying, to see her, that it's a lot better picture, in my head for that. So that's important. Mortuary, our business though is 90% talking and 10% working with a dead body. Essentially what we do as funeral directors is to make it simply, we plan a wedding in 3 days, essentially. We get the pastor, we get the church, we get the lunch, we get the flowers, we get everything, and all set it up, and sometimes in 3 days. And so that's that's a challenge. And also, there's no two families or no two set of arrangements that are the same. The family that's sitting at the arrangements table today is going to be completely different than the one tomorrow. The funerals we had today are going to be pretty much completely different than the ones that we're going to have tomorrow. So there's no sitting down and waiting for average, because there's no average. And so you have to pay attention to what's going on and be able to adapt to whatever they ask. And we always have to do it very calm too, because if we're calm, then they're calm. If we're all running around with our heads cut off, then they're going to be doing the same thing. So inside, our heads are spinning, figuring how we're going to do that. On the outside, it's, oh yes, we can take care of that, no problem. And we remember that the people that we're dealing with aren't thinking right. Their minds are blank, and that's just the way it happens. If when somebody dies, if you know it's coming, your mind isn't going to be right. You're not going to remember what you had for lunch that day. You're not going to remember. You're going to be wondering why you walk into the kitchen, And so there's a fine line with asking all the questions to make sure that they choose what they want, or directing them to do what you want. And you don't want to be directing people what we want. We want to find out what we want to ask the questions. So So they know what so we do what they want. So it's a little bit of mind reading. But this is my 41st year, so I've been doing it a couple of years. So it's I don't know. I don't know, other than my dad, I don't know who else would hire me, to be perfectly honest. So
Oh, that's so untrue, Dan. But let's take a step back because you're talking
yes,
about some of dealing with actual
yeah,
the death and the
right,
families, but you are running a family-owned business
right,
that is the oldest family-owned funeral home in this area. So let's
correct.
go back to your dad when he started the business so
Well,
people can get a little bit of a flavor for Dougherty Funeral Home
sure.
and how long you've been in business and then rolling into second generation, and then we'll get into third generation here as we move forward.
Yeah, well, you're going to have to try to keep me on track, Tom, because I have attention deficit too. So,
Well,
so
maybe that's why we get along so well, Dan.
my dad's dad went to Hibbing from Litchfield, Minnesota in 1903 to be a bookkeeper at the Barrett Funeral Home and Livery. And Mr. Barrett told him to get his license, and so he did. My dad was the oldest son, and so he was pretty much told he was going to be a funeral director. So my dad was born in 1916. Yeah, 1916. And so he went to mortuary school and he went back to work in Hibbing, and the war was going to start. So my dad joined the Navy before the war because he wanted to fly. And so my dad was a plank owner of the USS Massachusetts, which was a battleship. And what the flying he did was they had float planes on the back, and they would catapult the float planes off the back, and they would spot fire and search for subs and things like that. And then you'd land on you'd land up behind, there's a hook on the pontoon, and, they would then lift you. They had a net that they would drag behind the battleship, and then they would lift them back onto the battleship. My dad actually started World War II. A lot of people don't know this, but the admiral for the invasion of North Africa took his battleship as the flagship. And the pilots, when they invaded North Africa to start the war for the U.S., were brought to the wardroom, and the admiral said, if you fly over the pier and there's a white flag, that means that they're not going to fight, because they were the Vichy French, the French that were more for Germany. But if they fire at you, you're supposed to say batter up, and then the admiral would say play ball. And so my dad was, here's this kid from Hibbing flying over North Africa, and all of a sudden there were fireworks going off around him, and he said, "Oh, cool, fireworks!" And then he figured out that they were trying to kill him, and so he radioed back to the ship, batter up, and the admiral said play ball, and that's what got him into the war. So then he was shot down and a prisoner of war for about 5 days. So
Never knew that. Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
yeah.
Wow. And
So
so
anyway,
when he came back from the war, Dan, then he
yes,
went
yes,
into the business with his
and
father.
correct. And he got into the business with his father, and this funeral home in Duluth was called at the time Grady and Hughes, and it was bankrupt and it was for sale. And my dad knew that he wanted to be on his own and not have any partners with his family, because he had a big family, and he didn't get along with all of them. So he came to Duluth in 1948 and took over Grady and Hughes, which is our building right here that we've been in. You normally, when you buy a funeral home, you don't change the name, because there should be some goodwill. In other words, like when we were approached by Williams and Lobermeyer, Mary Williams and Bruce Lobermeyer to buy them out, we did, 5 years ago, but the name is the same because they were good people and they had a great name. So to be perfectly honest, we would have been idiots to change the name because they had a good reputation. But anyway, so you normally don't change the name. So the first week my dad was here, it was in January, he was shoveling the sidewalk, and then the neighbor lady walked by and she said, "Are you the new owner?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am." she said, I'm not walking through that door as long as that sign is up. And he said, ma'am, if you walk by this afternoon, you'll see the sign will be down. That's when he figured out that he's going to go on his, have to go with Dougherty. And he went out and bought a hacksaw and hacksawed the sign down. And then it was Dougherty Funeral Home from that point on.
What year was that, Dan?
1948.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so then, being 9 to 12, I came around at the right time to go into the business because Dad, after I got my license, was finally done paying college for all of us kids, and he could afford to retire. And so actually, he was 70 years old when I started buying him out, and the rest is history. Like I said, he was a great person to learn from. He was incredibly calm. The only time we'd see him get upset is if one of us kids got hurt. Then Dad could not stand to see us hurt, and then he got a little bit more upset. So,
Dan,
but yes.
what services did Dougherty Funeral Home have back when your dad started, and what services do you have today? Because times have changed.
They have really a lot. Actually, I like this story. Back in the old days, actually, when my grandpa started, they had horse-drawn hearses, and he one time and they had locations around up in Hibbing, and no phones. And so if somebody died, they would get a hold of somebody that had a phone or go to one of the mining office, and then they would get a hold of whatever funeral director. They'd tell them how old the person was, and at that time you'd bring the casket out to them, and then the families. The first funeral directors in America were women, because they got all the women took care of the dead bodies, and so the women back in those days would clean the body and dress the body and keep. There wasn't as much embalming back when he first started, and so they would just keep them in ice really to keep them cool. And keeping a body cool keeps the bacteria production down, so it keeps the decomposition down. So anyway, so he gets a call about this 20-some-year-old kid that died. So he brings out a standard adult casket. They were very simple back then. And then they had a couple night visitation at the families, and he went out with the hearse. Grandpa went out with the hearse, and they put the casket in the back of the hearse, and they brought it to the church. And there were some pretty good dips, and the roads weren't like today, where they would blast through hills to make them more straight. So up and down, up and down, up and down to get to the church. And my grandpa gets the casket inside, opens up the casket, and there's nobody there. And he goes, what? And but he saw a little something at the foot end of the casket, and he reached down and he felt hair. Well, it ends up that the person that died was a midget, and he had slipped down to the foot end of the casket. They didn't tell him that they only needed a 4-foot casket. So so that's things that they would do. A lot of visitations back in those days were at home too, and so it wasn't uncommon to take out front windows and lift caskets through the front windows for the visitation with the family, and bringing out the casket bier. That's what this casket sets on, and the flower stands, and if it was Catholic, a kneeler, things like that, and candles. So you'd be transporting those all out for a couple of days, and then you'd go pick them up. Or there were cases back in the day where you brought that body up with an ambulance cot up into the apartment, and then bring the casket up separate, because you couldn't carry both. So back in those days, there were two-day visitations or so, where we just pretty much have one today. Cremation, there was no cremation back then. Probably wasn't until the 40s that maybe they started doing cremation. Back there were a lot more services in the church, because pretty much everybody went to church at that time. So we're getting more and more services where if people don't have a church, we're having today more and more services where people don't have a religion, and so they're getting almost like MCs or stuff like that to, or to kind of just kind of get, you know, introduce the service and who's speaking and what the songs are too. Um, we're we're seeing more and more, which is really, I think, due to COVID, of people that are saying that according to Bob's wishes, there be no services. And, you know, there isn't the most anti-funeral director psychologist in this world that would tell people not to have a service. They might not like us, but they're going to say you really do need to have a service. And so people are really, really missing the boat there. But you know what? They pay us to do what they want. They pay us to do what they want us to do. You know what I mean? So, all we can do is give a family direction and whys nots, and then they make the decisions.
So talk to us about let's say just a typical funeral. So somebody passes, let's say somebody's in the hospital, and what services do you offer to the family from A to Z, and that is the death of their loved one until you are done and you send an invoice to somebody?
Well, we can make a removal from the place of death, whether that's a hospital, accident scene, although quite often that's a medical examiner now, nursing homes, or the person's home. And that's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So we go to work when the phone rings. And so to make a removal, when a body is involved, you need to be a licensed funeral director. You can't have a funeral assistant make the removal. You have to be licensed. Anything to do with the body, you need to be a licensed funeral director. So that's actually a very good law. So then, if we're talking to the family, we'll find out when they're going to want to see us. They'll come in and see us, or we'll go out to the house too. It doesn't, I've gone to nursing homes or deaths at a house at midnight, and I ask when they'd like to come in, and they say, well, we're all up, could we come in now? And I say, well, just give me 15 minutes so I can get back and turn on the lights. And so I've made funeral arrangements at 1, 2, 3, 5 in the morning, because that's when everyone is up. I'm going to skip back a little bit, Tom, but my dad, when I started, told me 2 things. He said, if the family wants you to stand on your head in the corner, ask them what corner and for how long. And number 2 was, don't piss off the lunch ladies. And you really don't want to piss off the lunch ladies, because that's almost as important right there, because the lunch ladies can make things wonderful for you or terrible for you. And I prefer them spoiling me rotten, and us rotten too. So
Dan, at one time, I remember you telling me that your funeral will be the only party you throw where you don't send invitations.
Yeah. And that's actually the cool thing, Tom. When nobody is invited to a funeral or a visitation, people just show up. And I talked earlier that you can't remember what you had for lunch that day, but you can remember who came. And to me, it's kind of God's way of getting people through this. He's kind of, he gives us free will, but he's there when something bad happens to make it so we can get through. So, but it's important because people will reciprocate too. I've had some people that they were big leaders and stuff like that, and they expected 300 people at the funeral, and there was 140. They never went. Him and his wife never went to a funeral, and people don't, hey, Bob was at my service. We need to go. So it's, you reap what you sow too. But and it's actually really a cool thing. You see we watch the families at the visitations and the funerals, and they're just at awe of all the people that took time out of their day to come and be with them. And it's a wonderful feeling, and you can see it in the family's eyes. They're glistening all the time because they're just so happy that that you showed up at the service. So it is cool. So I love what I do. I believe in funerals, and that's probably why I'm probably never going to be retiring, because I'd go to the funeral anyway. I know so many people. I go to it, and people seem to like to see me in a suit there. So and that's really good for my ego too, because that makes me feel good that I'm doing something right too. So yeah, it's a really a great profession.
Dan,
And
let's
yes.
go back to, you were talking about meeting with the family.
Oh
So
yeah.
you've taken the body to your
Right.
funeral home. Now it's time to meet with the body and make, or the family, excuse me,
Right.
and make plans. Can
Right.
you walk us through, because we're definitely, and I have experience doing this exact thing
Yeah.
with you, and
Right.
you walked us through.
Right.
You were so professional, and you had such a way of going through step by step by step, because
Right.
we are not thinking straight, but you made sure we
Correct.
went through these steps so that we didn't leave any stone
Right.
uncovered. Can you walk through some of those steps so
Yeah.
maybe families can
Yeah.
plan for themselves for their own demise?
Yeah. We set aside 2 hours for funeral arrangements. Actually, any meeting we have, we set aside 2 hours because we don't want to rush. And when their funeral arrangements are done, we want to know who we're working with, and we want to make sure that they know who we are too. And knowing, I've known you for a long time, so there was a lot of BSing that went on, which I kind of enjoy too. Anyway, what we do as funeral directors, first of all, for the state is we get the information for a death certificate. So when a family comes in, there's always got to be about 10 minutes or more of talking, um, just to get everybody comfortable. And you know um, my absolute favorite thing to ask a couple is, how did you meet? And the stories I just love. I mean, it's on blind dates, or I just knew she was the one, or blind dates and they married the other one, or I met her in high school and we've never been apart since. I just really love that. But that also makes them a little bit more comfortable too, that of what we're doing. We're finding, we're finding out about them and how they met, and it kind of helps, with getting on with things. So then what we do for the state is we need to fill out a death certificate. And the death certificate tells the state that this person died, and the this is what the cause of death was. And that sounds really simple, but what it is no matter what it is. And so if it's a medical examiner case, if a person dies, if you die at home or anywhere and it's unattended, it's a medical examiner case. Or if accidental, suicidal, homicidal, strange, whatever. And so by us knowing what needs to be done to get this death certificate complete, it kind of makes it so somebody doesn't kill their wife and get away with it. You know what I mean? It's because we can't do anything until we get a signed death certificate, a lot of things. And so that way we get that completed. And so then the state knows that, okay, this person died and this was killed them, and they don't have to worry about anything else. Then we do a burial removal transit permit, which tells the state what happened to the body. Was the body buried? Was the body cremated? Was the body given to science? Was the body shipped out of state? Are shipping it to California? And if you're cremated, and then they also will want to know if the ashes are going to be interred somewhere. So are they going to be in a niche, or are they going to be just buried in the ground? So that tells them that the body was properly disposed of. I don't like the word because dispose is like garbage. You're disposing garbage, but that's the term, that it was properly taken care of. So they don't have to worry about, um, they don't have to worry about, um, whether, whether or not this is a diseased body and it's out there getting other people sick too. And so that makes sure that it's all public health. That's what we do. We're licensed by the Minnesota Department of Health. And so, and that was, and then, so we get the information for the death certificate. So, the person's full name, date of birth, place of birth, date of death, place of death, social security number. Funeral directors are who notify the social security of the death. So we take care of that too. The questions we also have to ask for the death certificates are spouse's name, mom's or dad's name, first name, last name, mother's first name, mother's maiden name. It used to be when I started, they had to know where they were born too, but we don't have to worry about that today. And then how many years of education? What did they, what did they go through high school? Did they do a little bit of college, master's degree, BA, BA, BS, or whatever, or 8th grade or any no schooling at all. Also need to have the person's occupation. So me, I'm a funeral director in the funeral business. Women that never that just took care of the kids, they're homemakers. I remember I couldn't believe I said this one day, and it was about 5 or 6 kids. I said, did your mother work for a living? And I turned white as soon as it came out of my mouth. I said, if my mother ever heard me say that, she would have killed me. Did your mother work outside the home? And actually, what's kind of cool about that, there are some women that did work outside the home, but they were more proud of raising their family, and so on their death certificate, that was it, homemaker. So we do that, and then we let this on the death certificate, was the body buried, entombed, cremated, whatever, right there, and then we get that to the doctor. Yes,
Dan, question for you on all that questioning that you had there on birth date, schooling, married, children, all this, is that to build up to an obituary?
Yes, we start with all that information because that's what we need primarily for the state is information for the death certificate, but that also then does build into the obituary. And then after we're done asking those questions, then we say a member of a church and we put the church down, and then hobbies, things you like to do. What did mom like to do? So we write all those things down, and then you normally would get preceded in death by mom and dad, maybe some siblings or a child or something like that. And then we go into survivors. And so, if there's a spouse still there, they're number one, children and their spouses are number 2. We like to mention the grandchildren because usually grandma and grandpa are pretty proud of the grandchildren. So get their names in there, and great grandchildren. And then siblings, and then every once in a while you get some of the furry creatures in there too, which really are part of the family. I know I'm the same way. I've gotten a new dog and I just love her. So she would be in my obituary too. So, and then we're getting to what type of services are we going to have? Are they going to be at a church? They're going to be here at the funeral home? Are we going to have visitation the night before here or night before at the church? We really push having a visitation the night before. And we were lucky enough to have a grief psychologist talk to our funeral directors group. And when he was done, he said, now I'm going to tell you the 3 things that pissed me off. And number 1 was, according to Bob's wishes, there'll be no services. He said, what's Bob doing telling his family how to grieve? Number two was just having a visitation an hour prior. He said to us, how many people can you truly talk to in an hour? And we look at each other, well, I've never even thought of that. He said 6 to 9. He said, so if you're, 6 people, you're only talking to them for 10 minutes. You and I have been talking for, for 25 minutes or so, he said, so how are you going to talk to everybody? He said, a visitation an hour prior is not a visitation an hour prior. It's about 40 minutes to a half hour prior, because the only people that come are the family. And then the pastor's going to want to meet with the family at 10 minutes too. He said, how many times haven't you been able to go to a funeral or visitation because of work? Which is right there. You and I have run into that. I've not been able to go to funerals because I'm at other funerals. And the thing that I added at the end was the visitation the night before. All you got to do is be there celebrating your mom or your dad's life. That's it. The tough part's the day before, the next day. We used to charge for the use of our chapel for the visitation the night before. But as soon as we started talking people into it, we stopped, because we didn't want to talk them into visitation and say, oh, by the way, you owe us $275 for the chapel. So that's how much we believe in it. We're hiring people to come in and they're going to work those, and we are doing that because this is the best for you, not the best for us. So, and that's actually really turned out pretty good. And then the third thing Dr. Overshaw said was, for him, was scattering ashes. He said of his clients, because he is a grief therapist, he said, of all of the problems, this is the hardest problem to solve for his patient, because where are they? They scattered them up on the lake or on the family farm or where they like to hunt. There's nothing on earth that says that person was here, and it really bugs families. We've had families that have scattered ashes and went and bought cemetery properties and put markers on, just because there was nothing that says that mom and dad were here. So you got to be remembering those things too, for families and stuff like that. And then we'll type up the obituary too, normally for the family. Probably about 95% of the time we do the typing. And being from Hermantown, I tell people you can't say anything about my grammar. And they were usually pretty good about that. I said, keep in mind, I'm a dyslexic funeral director. Please be gentle on me. So anyway, so what we do is we'll type up the obituary, then we'll email it to one of the family members, and we'll say to them, you just go in there, make any changes you want. We're kind of just putting in, we're putting in the basics, and you just expand it however you want to do. And it's a lot. The Duluth News Tribune only publishes on Wednesdays and Saturdays now, so we have more time, and the families have more time to get obituaries done than having to say, hey, you're making funeral arrangements. We tell them to be in tomorrow's paper. The deadline is 4 o'clock, and so there's good and bad with that. The newspaper is online, so that does help, but we actually have domain names for obituary sites for up here, because we thought this was going to happen. We were didn't think it'd be happening so quick that they'd be going to a weekly or bi-weekly or whatever it is, twice a week. And so eventually, we were looking into when this newspaper does go, if they, the way they're going, are we going to be doing it like the small towns where the obituaries are read? Are they going to be read on KDAL at 8 in the morning, or are we going to do our websites, which we hope to do actually, because an average obituary in the paper today, Tom, is $700.
Holy moly.
I know. And actually, I think obituaries are probably one of the few things that are keeping the papers going. So we'd be able to, if we got a website, we could, I'm sure, do it a lot less than that, but we'd have to get the other funeral homes involved with it and stuff like that. But that's a contingency we're looking at. We're in our business, you can stay current and continue, or you sell to a corporation. And I'm not selling to a corporation, never. They'll
Dan,
destroy it.
question about technology. You've been in the business 40 plus years now. How has technology helped your business?
You know, the biggest is the communication. I remember when I got an answering service, my dad was livid having an answering service. You need to answer those phones yourself. I said, Dad, I when my kids aren't old enough to answer a phone, Kim and I want to go out sometime, you know? And so having pagers gave funeral directors freedom. Answering services gave us freedom. Smartphones have been wonderful for us because we're able to be making funeral arrangements, and family has a picture of the mom or dad or whatever on their phone, and we say, well, send it to me. And I look at it and I say, well, right there, we instantly have this picture that we can use for the obituary or for doing the women's hair or for the memorial folders. So that and when I first started here, we would call in the obituaries to the newspaper. And whenever there was an error, it was our fault. And we are not perfect, but we're not always wrong. And so I got tired of that. And so I started typing up the obituaries and hand delivering to the paper. And then I remember this editor, I called because they were wrong, and the editor says, no, this is the way you gave it. I says, take a look at the sheet of paper I delivered you. You know, it's always nice to catch the newspaper guy lying. And so then we faxed obituaries. Now we essentially place the obituaries. We go online, put the obituary in, put the names and dates in, put the picture in, and then they just look at it and approve it and tell us that the families owe us their, $780, or we just had one today, it was 1,030. So
Wow.
yeah, well, it's kind of crazy. Although we shouldn't squawk too much. We had a funeral, we had a gentleman, or actually a priest that died here with the Greek church, and he was a great man, Father Philemon, and his obituary in the Duluth paper was $287, which was a lot back then. But they wanted it in the New York Times, and so we sent it out to the New York Times, and they told us it'd be $5,000. So what's that? Almost 20 times more than ours. And fortunately, we were able to let her know that your kids could use that $5,000 a lot more than the New York Times. So,
Exactly.
but it's so the technology has been good. Also, because of COVID, we're live streaming more funerals too. But there's a glitch there too with AI. We pay a fee so people can play music in our funeral home. Any copyrighted music or anything, we pay a fee. I think it's $500 or $600 a year, and then there's another one for being on the internet. But the AI with on Facebook, as soon as they hear a copyright song, stops it, turns it off. And so then we have to, and we've over and over said, hey, we have a license to do this. We are not breaking the law. You can't be doing that. But any business where you cannot talk to somebody in person is to me a bunch of baloney. I
Dan,
don't like. Yes.
question for you on the most difficult aspect of your job. You're dealing with people that are grieving. What is the most difficult part of your job? And then end that with, what is the favorite part of your job?
Oh, the most difficult is children. Um, they just they destroy it. They destroy us too. Um, we don't want to be doing it. Everybody's here is in a bad mood because we're having to bury a child. It's that's that, or a young mother or young father that dies, if majority of our job are people in their 80s, 90s, and 100s, and it's a good celebration, and they've led a great life, and it's, and they were ready. But it's the people that weren't ready that just break us up a little bit too. And it usually comes in streaks too, to where we'll have 4 or 5 in a week, and I call it a week from hell, to be perfectly honest, because it's just, oh my, can we have somebody old? And by the end of that week, we are all in a very foul mood, because we're doing something that we don't. Fortunately, Tom, we're successful, and so we don't charge for people up till 18, and for our services, and it costs on everything else. And we've actually gone over that for some special cases too. So, but if we weren't successful, we wouldn't be able to do that.
Wow. I hope our listeners heard that, because that's some character right there, Dan. That families who are in the worst of their days with a child that has lost their life, that you wouldn't charge. I didn't know that. I'm learning that right now as our listeners do, but that sure tells your character as a person, as a human being, and as a business owner.
Yeah. And all of us it makes doing children easier for us too, knowing that we're really, really, really part of a solution, not part of making things worse. So it's tough. Also, our hardest funeral arrangements are also people that don't have any faith at all. And because there's nothing we can say that's going to make them feel better. That person is dead, they're never going to see him again, and that's it. Story's over. And so it's, when there's no hope, there's nothing.
Dan, I recall, and when we sat with you when my father passed, you one of the first things you said to us, and I'm not trying to turn this on to us in any way, is you said, this is going to be an easy meeting because I know your family, and I know you're a faithful family.
Oh, your dad was very faithful man too, though.
And I can tell you made the process much easier for us.
Yeah.
Right then and there when you said that. And so some of the words you said, you're in the communication business, 90% of it's about talking. You started with.
Yeah.
I can tell you that eased a lot of our pain right then and there of the whole process that was new to us as well.
Yeah.
Let me ask a question. We just got through some really funky years in 2020, 2021, when none of us could gather together, but yet you are in the business of putting together gatherings.
Right.
How did all of that change your business and what you had to do every day, Dan?
Well, we had to wash our hands even more, which we did anyway. There's very few people in this world that wash their hands more than funeral directors. When it first started, Tom, we didn't know what was going to be. And my dad always told stories of his father during the Spanish flu, and this is no exaggeration. He had people bringing their life savings into his office and saying, "What's your secret?" The Spanish flu was completely killing families and healthy people. And yet my grandfather, or nobody that worked for him, and nobody in his family was dying of the flu, even though they were taking care of it all. So we didn't know when this started whether or not that was going to be the Spanish flu. And so when it first started, we were very concerned, with everything. I had the flu the January it started. Well, I had COVID, but I didn't know I had COVID because it was there, before it all started. I've had it twice now. I had it in September. We actually had a funeral director that died from one of our funeral home up on the range up in Gilbert. But we don't know if he got it at work or if he got it at wherever. But also he was a heavy smoker, So COVID was bad. The worst part about COVID to me were people were dying alone, and there was no reason for that. There wasn't a lot of common sense happening with that, with common sense. the patients, we're finding out that the kids not being in school are how many years is going to take to catch up from that. The people that had no one to talk to. My nephew was in a terrible car crash. Nobody in his family was able to go into the hospital, but because of COVID, and yet the patients were having a hard time because there was no contact with the news. So then they hired people to come out from the outside to be in the hospital to see him. No, they came from the same place where their family was coming, but you know what? The common sense didn't prevail. So I have a hard time with COVID actually. And if you watched TV, you'd figure that half the population died. The death rate in the United States has gone up the same amount since 2014 every year. And actually last year it was below the year before. And so, yes, COVID was bad, but it just took the place of other things. People asked us when we're busy, and my answer was always, when you and everybody you know has a bad cold, you'll see a lot of obituaries. So one of the good things from it is Zooming or FaceTiming services, so people can do that. And I think we did one today where we did some Zooming. That's going to be something we're going to do forever. The bad part is that we told everybody during COVID that we will be glad to do the service again when COVID stops. And so let's have a service for mom or dad right now. And then when things settle down and you can have everybody come, then we'll do it again. And we did actually do that a lot, but not as many as we offered it to. So, but I think hopefully we've learned. It was interesting the way everybody wore their mask. I had a lady that came in and she had her mask down below her nose. And at that time I said, you're not required to have a mask on. She said, I know, but I'm doing this for my health. And I wanted to say, well, you might want to pull it up over your nose. We also had at the cemetery one time some people with knitted masks on. I thought that was interesting. Just like
the family crest on it, Dan.
Yeah.
Oh goodness.
Anyway, I'm glad it's done, Tom.
Absolutely. And it's changed everyone's business, and I know it definitely changed yours as well. And
Yep.
Folks, our special guest today is Dan Dougherty, co-owner and funeral director at Dougherty Funeral Home in Duluth, Minnesota. A great human being, a great family, and they will take care of you when you need their services for your loved ones. But Dan, we want to pivot here. So we're going to get on to a different subject. We're going to get on to you. So we're going to ask you, what does a funeral director do and an owner of a funeral home do outside of work? What are your hobbies?
I like to walk in the woods. I like golf, spending time with the kids, going out to dinner. Half Italian, so everything's about lunch and dinner. Let me see. Playing with the dog, out with friends, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Breakfast with friends. I'm trying to take it.
No more hockey?
I gave it up at 62.
You hung in there longer than my body did. God bless you.
Yeah, I wasn't making a glove save. People were hitting my glove.
Our reflexes get a little bit slower.
Oh man, yes, Dan, they do.
What's your favorite movie?
Big Fish, because it kind of reminds me of my dad. That's what I think Albert Finney in there. Actually, I love Hunt for Red October. John Wayne movies. Let me see. No, that's about Kelly's Heroes.
That's a good one there, boy, for our generation. How about your favorite place you've ever traveled?
South Africa. I was fortunate enough to go there 7 years ago, a little over 7 years ago. People were very nice, and the dollar was wonderful. as a rule, whenever I travel, it's expensive. Not that I want it to be. It's just like, the prices were down at UK, Mr. Doherty. Then we had to raise them. Uh, Food was spectacular. The things we saw were beautiful. Um, I'd go back there. I like Mexico. I love Montana, Wyoming, and the Black Hills. I absolutely love them too. Motorcycle out there, and I do like going out to Sturgis. We usually go out about a week before. I like to golf, so that's fun. But uh,
Perfect.
yeah, I want to play golf at St Andrews in Scotland. That's on
There
my
you
bucket.
go. Put it on
Yeah,
your bucket list. Exactly. And don't wait too long either.
no, I'm not. I'll be 65 in November, so I'm trying to take it easier.
There you go. And you have the next generation who you can trust in running the business here.
Yeah.
So, folks, our very special guest today is Dan Dougherty, co-owner and funeral director for Dougherty Funeral Home. What's your website, Dan?
Uh, www.dfhduluth.com.
And do you have social media?
We have a Facebook page.
So you can find Dougherty Funeral Home on their website or on their Facebook page. Dan,
Right.
thank you so much for a subject that most of us don't broach, most of us don't talk about a whole lot, but thank you for educating us on really what goes into your world every day. We greatly appreciate you taking the time and educating us.
Well, I enjoyed it too, Tom. So
Thanks for
very
being
much.
here. You
All right.
bet, Dan. And folks, until next time, just like Dan Dougherty, unplug from the indoors and recharge in the outdoors.